Alright, assuming that pretty much everyone knows this by now, Brian Shaw is going to be arm wrestling Eddie Hall coming up in the near future at the next King of the Table events. This is going to be the same event that Levon pulls Jerry Caderet, so this is super, super exciting. Now, going into this, up until this point, I would have been considering Brian to be the absolute massive favorite. It looked like his training was much more so dialed in. And of course, in terms of the genetic factor, in terms of Brian's ability to control height, his hand thickness, his hand size, and the things that you would think tend to translate more to the sport of arm wrestling, Brian has done a lot more grip strength. He tends to be more advanced in the department of the hand and wrist, anything that has to do with that. Eddie has matched Brian or done significantly better than Brian in some other lifts, things like shoulder press, things like deadlift, but the lifts that you would tend to think have much more of a carryover to arm wrestling, Brian excels in those. He, as far as I'm aware, is significantly stronger than Eddie. Now, another area that might be a little bit closer, maybe Eddie's arm strength, his bicep strength might be stronger. I'm not so sure about that. But just on paper, and also in terms of the commitment level that it seems like Brian is bringing, I just thought he was going to be the huge, huge favorite going into this. But then there was something that kind of changed my mind on all of that. Now, I'm not considering Eddie to be the favorite at this point because, and I think the commitment level probably is the biggest factor because Brian has been training for much longer at this point as far as I'm aware. But the thing that has really hugely improved Eddie Hall's stock going into this match, in my mind, is the fact that Neil Pickup is the one that is training Eddie Hall. And I watched a podcast where Eddie said that, if I remember correctly, Neil is training with Eddie at least once a week, and sometimes multiple times a week. They're doing sparring, they're doing technique work, they're doing table time. All of the things that, because Eddie already has so much strength, he's already so strong. So all the things that he really needs to work on the most, it's going to be technique. It's going to be translating all the force he already has to the table. It's going to be maximizing the output that he already has, causing it to attack Brian's weak points. And these are the things that you're going to learn. And maybe some of you guys don't know this. Maybe you just think of Neil Pickup as the commentator East versus West, but this is only something he's done recently. Neil is in my opinion, one of the greatest technical arm wrestlers of all time. And he even has some insane results just in terms of straight up his ranking. So not only is he one of the greatest arm wrestlers, but also one of the greatest technical arm wrestlers. And also Neil's ability to articulate technique in arm wrestling is probably better than anyone else that I'm aware of. So if you wanted anyone to train you, Neil Pickup is right up there at the very, very pointy end of the spectrum. And Neil is the one that is training Eddie. So in my mind, this has caused Eddie to go, his chances have gone significantly higher than they were before. Like I said, I'm not necessarily considering Eddie the favorite by any means because technique can only take you so far. But I wanted to look at a clip of the recent training session that they had. This is on the Arm Wars YouTube channel. I think this is like a 10-minute video. We're only going to look at 30 seconds or so here. But notice what Neil is having Eddie do here. He's doing this kind of sweeping top roll. Neil is top rolling Eddie. And then there's going to be this shift that happens where Neil begins to apply down pressure. And he's telling Eddie to purposely keep a flat wrist here. He's not cupping his wrist. And then Eddie's going to sweep back out once Neil applies down pressure. And this is a pattern that they're kind of working on repeatedly here. And what you're going to notice, and it becomes more and more refined as we watch this video, but what I noticed is that this looks a lot like Hermes Gasparini versus Vitaly Laletin. And we're going to look at that in just a second here. But essentially what's going on is that when you have a taller athlete, it's going to be really difficult for the shorter athlete to access their back pressure. Sometimes you're just going to end up pulling yourself right underneath your opponents. But what's going to happen as soon as the taller athlete begins to go down toward the pin pad is they're now applying down pressure, obviously. And what this is doing is it's gifting their opponent access once again to their back pressure. So to see this in real time, if this isn't making sense what I'm saying, let's take a look at Hermes Gasparini versus Vitaly Laletin at King of the Table. This is round 5. And what we can see here, if we watch this in slow motion, we'll see that upon the go of the match, Hermes is just trying everything he possibly can to get some sort of access to his power. and he just doesn't really have it off the go. You can just see he's completely having to hold on to Vitaly. He has no access to attack Vitaly's hand and wrist with his own back pressure because he's just going underneath Vitaly. This is because Vitaly's arm is just so much longer. But watch what happens as soon as Vitaly starts to go down toward the pin pad, as you will see this change. All of a sudden, Vitaly cracks his own wrist back because Hermes now has access to his back pressure as Vitaly applies down pressure. So, if, just in the center of the table, Hermes doesn't have this access to this power. But as Vitaly gets close to the pin pad, Hermes gains that access, and you see Vitaly's wrist crack back. Hermes has a little pop off there as he feels that he gets that access to the power, he gets the stop. And Vitaly's right next to the pin pad, but he now can't finish because he's gifted Hermes access to his back pressure by trying to finish. And of course, Hermes does end up winning this match. Vitaly just can't quite get the pin here. And Vitaly, interestingly enough, at 6'8" or whatever he is, and I think Hermes is around 6'2", maybe 6'3", Vitaly is now, as soon as he applies down pressure, he's now the one that is holding on to Hermes Gasparini, even though he's so much taller, and traditionally he would have a much easier time forcing the shorter guy to hold on to him. That's not what's happening here, and we see Hermes completely turn this around, and eventually he finishes in a flop press. In some of the earlier rounds, he's even able to do something similar to this and regain his cup by climbing. But this is an example of what I think Eddie potentially has a lane against Brian to do. Brian, of course, would be representing Vitaly Laletin or vice versa, and Hermes would be representing Eddie Hall. Because Eddie Hall has this shorter arm, it is going to be difficult for him to gain access to use his back pressure right off the go. But if you picture Neil Pickup as Brian Shaw here, as soon as he sweeps over and he's forcing Eddie to hold on to him, but then he begins to apply down pressure, you can see how Eddie regains that access to his back pressure into his pronation through his thumb, and he's able to drag back out and reverse this in top roll. So I think that there is a lot of potential in this lane for Eddie to do something, and potentially if the match goes into a hook as well, because he does have that shorter arm. But you have to know, if you have a shorter arm, you really have to know how to access your back pressure and what you're going to have to force your opponent to do. And I think that what Neil is showing Eddie, he's showing him not just this, but all kinds of different counters, how to block a hook. He's showing him pretty much all of the fundamentals of the sport. And you should definitely go check out the full video. But this move right here, I think, is very promising if Eddie can figure out how to use that access to his back pressure that Brian gifts him as he goes down toward the pin pad. Because he does have way better leverage for arm power with his shorter arm. I think potentially he might be able to do something. So I found this very encouraging that Neil is the one coaching Eddie. Like I said, I'm still thinking of Brian Shaw. I think he just has to be the favorite when you consider everything. I think he's also significantly bigger. And it seems like everyone who's trained with him, from what I've heard, they've just been totally blown away by his strength. But in terms of the technical realm, I know that Brian is going to be getting the very best people he can, but it's hard to think of anyone who's actually better as a coach than Neil Pickup. Neil Pickup might just be the best coach you could possibly have to train a new person to arm wrestle. So I think that in this department, Eddie Hall does have a significant advantage. But let me know what you guys think about this. I found this super interesting, but I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts on this in the comments. All right, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you later.